This is ChangeMakers with Katie Goar, finding the right solutions for the affordable housing community.
This week's ChangeMaker is Janet Abrahams, the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Housing Authority of Baltimore City. Janet joined Baltimore in 2017 after years of serving at three of some of the largest housing authorities in the country: Chicago, Newark, and New York City. Over the course of her 20-year career, she has played key roles in developing innovative approaches to improving affordable housing communities and the quality of life for its residents. Janet, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Katie. Thank you for having me.
It is great to have you here, and there's a bunch of topics that I want to cover with you. But first, I typically like to start by asking everyone how they found themselves in affordable housing. So why don't we start there, and maybe you just tell us, how did you come to work in affordable housing, or maybe what drew you to this particular industry?
So it was really interesting. And to be honest with you, I kind of fell into affordable housing. My major in college was social work. And so when I graduated, I started working in the social work field where my specialty was sexual abuse. And I worked for the state of Connecticut for many years doing just that, the social work program and what have you. And then I fell in love and moved to Chicago. And in Chicago, I remember when I got there, I worked for Volunteers of America. And I also was doing social work. I was a case manager. And I ended up going into one of the projects in Chicago. And I remember I didn't like the work that I was doing in Chicago because it wasn't fulfilling. And I started putting my resume out. And a company called William Moorhead and Associates contacted me and said they needed a caseworker because they were just taking over the Scatter Sites West program from the Housing Authority. I went over there as a caseworker, and they fired the entire staff after I had been there for about 2 months and asked me if I wanted to be the manager of the site at the time. And of course, my answer was no. I am a social worker, for Christ's sakes. I don't know anything about affordable housing, but what they did promise me, and they did, I will never forget them. They were the reason why I ended up in this industry. They taught me everything they knew, and I was able to get further education on my own and through them. And that's how I ended up where I am today.
When you describe what you do to your family, how do you put that into words then?
It's interesting because I grew up in public housing, and I always used to say to my family, I am one of the poster children of HUD, assisted housing. And so we always talk about that in a way because we all lived in public housing. We were part of the, years ago when I was growing up in public housing, they had so many programs that you can take advantage of. And so we talk about that a lot. And for my family, it's not an anomaly. They know exactly what I do because we have lived it, and they're really proud because they see some of the things that we're doing here in Baltimore and in other states where I have worked. And so that makes them feel good because they always felt that, especially my mom, when she was alive, she always felt like there was more that could be done and should be done to help families.
It's interesting. You called yourself the poster for affordable housing or public housing because, if anything, what you're saying is that you know how it can work.
Exactly. Because remember, the idea, public housing is supposed to be temporary. My family was serious about that. And we took advantage of all the programs that at the time I lived in Westbrook Village in Hartford, Connecticut. There were a lot of programs that they had back then that you can take advantage of, helped you with college, summer jobs. Upward Bound, I was part of Upward Bound, that went to Miss Porter's school for girls during the summertime. So, there were so many programs that existed back then. And so I took advantage of those programs. That's why I always say I'm the poster child.
So it sounds like you had great family support and buy-in. There were available programs. And then you mix that with stable housing. That's a combination that has really launched you forward to allow you to pursue your degrees and really advance your career. It sounds like your family dynamic is interesting. I mean, when you interact with residents or developers or staff, how do you use your family background to connect with them? I'm assuming it's natural and this is just a progression of who you are, but tell us how you incorporate that into where you are now.
Well, one of the things that I always ask myself, would I want my mother to live here? And I use that concept everywhere I go and everything that I do. When I am dealing with developers, when I am dealing with residents, I'm very very sympathetic to residents who are living in conditions that I know I personally would not want to live in. And so that has driven me over the years to make sure that we communicate that. And I also like dealing with developers that are like-minded, that share our mission. When you're dealing with developers that don't share your mission, that's where the problem is. So I like to make sure we're sharing our mission and vision. And a lot of these developers, they share that, because being in affordable housing in this industry is not a lucrative industry. And everyone knows it takes at least 17 different steps and financing tools just to get to a closing table, as opposed to the market rate. You go to the bank, you get a loan, and you do what you need to do. You really have to have a commitment in order to really be in this particular industry. And so that's what I look for when in dealing with developers, and I communicate that to them to make sure they understand where we're going and what we're trying to do.
Could you imagine if in every affordable housing community there were signs in the property management office or the maintenance offices or in the resident services areas that had signs that said, would I want my mother to live here? Or how would I respond if this was my mother? Could you imagine the radical customer service changes that we would see?
Definitely. And that's how I talk to my staff. I always say to them, you have to put yourself in their position. We all have issues. No one is absolved of any issues. When you come to work here, we're not telling you that your issues are not important, but when you walk through that door, you have to be able to separate it, and you have to be able to understand this resident's frustration. They have a leak in their ceiling that's been leaking for months and no one has done anything about it. Would you want to have a leak in your ceiling for months and no one has done anything about it? So and that's why here at the Housing Authority, we developed the 4 C's. And one of the 4 C's is customer service. And we have been doing a lot of training in customer service just to get back that feeling, because you become numb to certain things after a while.
And so many of us in the industry, we talk about unit numbers and addresses and client numbers and tenant numbers and numbers. And we forget about that personal connection of what is going on in that particular person's life. Name their name, know who they are, and know what the issues are. So maybe it's your background of social work and your degrees, or maybe it's just, your heart that you are making that connection for your staff. So that is a challenge for all of us in the industry to take note of what you just said here.
Exactly. It is. It's very difficult to really separate your personal issues and your personal beliefs and really treat people like they should be treated.
So tell us about your time in Chicago, New York, and Newark, and how you've brought those maybe commonalities or best practices, how you've brought those to Baltimore now.
Sure. I always, when I started working in the industry, you take a look at some of the positives and you take a look at some of the negatives, because that's not something I ever wanted to do, was to run an agency, believe it or not. But I always used to say, if I ever had to supervise people and deal with the public, how would you do it? So I started to take bits and pieces away from the different executive directors that I work with. And I've worked with some really great executive directors that really helped forge my way to where I am today. Overall, housing authorities, people tend to want to isolate and say, oh, we're different because this is a different city. They all have the same issues, right? We have long-term deferred maintenance. We have obsolete housing stock, and we have residents that deserve better living situation, and also programs to help them towards full family self-sufficiency. And so I have always had that mantra and able to look at how do you make the housing better? How do you bring more programs? How do you work with families that's really on this trajectory that they really have the same values. They want to get out of where they are. They're there temporarily. How do you do that? So all the different work that I have done was to make sure that I was preparing myself, even though I didn't want to be an ED, but just, making sure that we have those values that we can push forward. Working in Chicago really prepared me for relocation. I don't know if you remember back when the plan for transformation was adopted in Chicago, and there was this massive group, over 20 plus thousand of families that needed to be relocated. And that's where compassion came in. I worked with those groups, and so that really helped me to understand the regulations, what you can and cannot do, demolition. So overall, working in each one of them, except New York. New York was a different animal. New York, I introduced a different program, which was an asset management model. And there, working with those groups in the 5 boroughs helped me to really, really understand how the inner workings of a large agency, that everything is centralized, how difficult it is to manage. So I wanted to make sure when I came here, everything was decentralized and that people had the ability and were held accountable for what they were supposed to do. So that's really all the things that really prepared me for this job.
Well, you may not have wanted to set out and become CEO, but you're definitely your path has definitely progressed you here, and you're the right person with the right blended background too. So I think we need more of your types in this industry that have the core asset management understanding mixed with the personal delivery of services, because it's really adding to what Baltimore needs right now. So let's talk about Baltimore specifically. Why don't you give us some specific challenges that other places may not be experiencing? Any of those that you want to share with us?
Well, one of the things about Baltimore, it's not unique, but it's something that's hindering a lot of the progress that we can make here, is that Baltimore is about high 90 percentage of African Americans. And so because of that, the poverty level, of course, is low. And one of the biggest issues that we're having here, for example, we are in the process of implementing our strategic plan. So when I came here, we put together a strategic plan that really focused on how we as a housing authority will manage moving forward, and how we will reposition some of our assets to make sure that we bring them up to standards. And so we had, of course, buckets. We had the RAD buckets. And so we're still doing a lot of RAD conversions currently. We have converted over 24 of our high rises, which collectively was over $700+ million in those properties. We would never have been able to do that under the regular public housing model. We are also working very diligently to reposition some of our most vulnerable assets. And those are the ones, the family properties. We have gone after grants and done a lot of different things to really try to see how we can make it palatable for the residents, but at the same time have a good result project that our families can enjoy. One of the things that we're facing here is the concept of some of these properties are located in areas, they're not in areas of opportunity. And so they're located where they cannot pass the site and neighborhood standards. And so unless you have a redevelopment plan for the area, you will not be able to flip those properties using several different type of models. Maybe the RAD model, which doesn't work for these type of properties because of these are townhomes stretching over X amount of acreage. The issue that we're working from now is to one of the things that we will be doing in the next couple of weeks. I just finished in front of the planning commission is to try to get some plans adopted for these areas so that we can use that as leverage to let HUD know that there is a redevelopment plan for the area. Because the plan exists, we are the catalyst for change. So if we start the plan, then others will come. And I think the Perkins Somerset Old Town is a perfect example of that. I mean, people were redeveloping around our property. It pretty much was affectionately called the hole in the donut. And what we did was we created a plan that covers 244 acres that stretched over 5 different neighborhoods to make sure that we can show HUD and the public that we are serious about looking at neighborhood people and housing and stretching that across the area so that we can create a neighborhood of opportunity. That's some of the challenges that we face here in Baltimore. Of course, the blight issue here, a lot of vacant units, and then, of course, one of the other issues that just came about is that we are running out of landlords. Our landlords, because of COVID-19 and what happened with the moratorium on evictions and all the different pieces of legislation that went into that, landlords are now gun shy and refusing to lease
Right.
to our clientele. So that's also another big issue that we're facing here.
I want to circle back to the landlords and the blight, but let me touch on this redevelopment. You called it the hole in the donut, which is so
Yes,
fascinating. But you mentioned it was Perkins, Somerset, and I think you said Old Town areas, right?
exactly.
You're sort of in between the we have to go out and develop mixed use planning, but then you're also showing that you've done it too and that you can do it as a major, catalyst for entire neighborhoods. So on those specific areas that you mentioned, what were the additional, ads for the community as far as number of units, parks, other types of non-traditional development that was part of that specific package?
The Perkins Somerset Old Town plan, affectionately called the PSO, affectionately the hole in the donut. um, the reason why we called it the hole in the donut, if you were to get into a helicopter and fly around, you will see that they had the to the north, and I am directionally challenged. So, but anyway, they had Hopkins. They had EBDI, which is another housing program. They have the harbor. I mean, they were literally surrounded by all these beautiful neighborhoods, and they were just sitting in the middle where they literally had their own neighborhood. So, for example, Perkins Homes was its own neighborhood, as opposed to Fells Point, Butcher Hill, Little Italy, that kind of thing. So they really stuck out. And so what we did was we went to the residents and the stakeholders and we talked about what can we do to make this a more seamless community where everything kind of knit its way back into the communities, because Perkins touched on 5 areas because of how big it was. So you had a 629 unit property. And we all agreed that the best thing to do was to demolish the property. But demolishing the property, that's easy. What do you do after you demolish this site? And so one of the biggest concern were the residents. So we wanted to make sure that we were able to service those families, which we did. But we know when you look at a neighborhood, what it takes to really get it revitalized. So we went to the school. We negotiated to demolish 2 schools because they were really across the street from each other and underutilized. So we're talking 2 schools. And so we would be demolishing both schools and creating a 950 seat state of the art school. in this community. Then we looked at the economic engine for this community. And there was this area called Old Town Mall. It was a pedestrian mall, and it was very vibrant years ago. But now it's just blighted, boarded up shops, and it's just not an area that you would want to go and open a shop today. So that's part of the entire redevelopment strategy. So in that area, we will have parking structures. We still will have a pedestrian mall. We have added 150 door hotel. We will have restaurants. We also will have an incubator. And this incubator is for the community. So anyone who wants to invest in a small business, the incubator will be their startup so that they'll be able to grow from there and then go and become, open their own store or whatever endeavor they want to do. And then, of course, you will have some townhomes in that area also that will definitely just kind of pull the community back together. And next door to that, you will have 4 buildings, which is the Somerset side, and we're bringing a grocery store. This is a food desert. We're also bringing in 2 parks and some small pocket parks around the buildings. And there is another park, which is owned by the city, City Springs Park. It has a swimming pool. So we brought them in also. And so they will be doing the remodeling for that park. And then the Chick Webb Community Center, which was named after a musician, well-known musician here, that community center will be completely refurbished. So it's a lot going on. And we're tearing down 629 units, but at the end of the day, we're bringing back 1,360 units of housing, which include the replacement housing. But at the end of the entire plan, with all the different investments that's happening, we'll have over 2,000 new affordable units in that footprint.
Wow, that is amazing. Not just the amenities and the schools and the parks, but the fact that you're doubling the amount of units. So that is not often done. I mean, typically you see demolishing 600, replacing with 300 or
Right.
something that doesn't have quite the substantial impact. So this is a great, great innovative moment for you and your team.
Oh, yeah. And this came to light with the Choice Neighborhood Initiative grants from HUD, which was a $30 million grant. And it's not to solve all the problem. What it does, that grant, the specialty is to spark investment in an
Right.
area so that you can, and that's exactly what it has done. When we're through with this particular plan, we will see over $1 billion worth of investment in this footprint.
Yeah, how many times do you think if you were given a choice neighborhood could just spend it? Like if that's one choice neighborhood award, but if they gave you 5 more, I predict you could spend all 5 of them, couldn't you?
Oh, exactly. Matter of fact, we intend to apply for a second grant next year. We're getting ready now, putting together, because it's really a long process. So we're starting that process, the kickoff, so we can get that a very robust application, a competitive application, because it's a very competitive grant.
Well, we're going to wish you the best on that. And on that note, let's take a break. But coming up in the second part of my talk with Janet Abrahams, the president and CEO of the Housing Authority of Baltimore, Janet shares the secret to her team's success in the Charm City.
We've been successful because we have really worked hard to make sure the message is clear. We get the message out, being extremely transparent to say, at the end of the day, this is what can happen here in this area. And this is how much investment Baltimore can get if we're able to really close on these deals.
Now, Janet, you're an MTW agency. And for folks not familiar with that, can you explain what MTW is and how that's helping you succeed in Baltimore?
Oh, definitely. So MTW means move into work. And this is where housing authority that's part of this particular group have the ability to block grant their fundings. And so that allows housing authority with the MTW status to take all the funding that we get, which is not something that a regular housing authority can do, but take all the funding that we receive to address the needs of the organization. But at the same time, having the MTW status also allows us to take a look at some of the regulations that are too strict, or it does not allow for our families to prosper. And so we can suggest a change to that particular regulation and implement it after being approved. And then, of course, what HUD does, they look at all the different changes that we have made, and they either choose to adopt or not. So one of the things, because of the MTW cohort, we were able to introduce different ways of doing things with our families. For example, you have some areas that have a higher rent, a higher contract rent, because that area can afford to do that. And they had to, of course, get it approved. And so you have new cohorts now that have joined this particular MTW family, and they're implementing different rent structures in their communities to see how that will work for the families. So basically, overall, what the program does is really help to better the families, and it help us to understand our families and see what works and what doesn't. But at the same time, with the block granting, it helps us to address their needs quickly, but it also help us to move a lot of our properties that are obsolete to a different financial platform, because HABC or any other MTW agency will now have not only the land, because that's what we have that power because we come with the land, but we can also help to fill some gaps with our block granting ability.
I'm sure it's also letting your families go to areas that are in market demand, but also represent areas of opportunity and maybe even attract and retain other landlords. Is that correct as well?
Exactly. I mean, so moving families, it allows us to take the instead of the 110% of the fair market rent, we have the ability to go up to 120%, which helps us in areas of opportunity. So we're able to negotiate with landlords because we have that ability to do that. And it allowed us also to implement landlord incentives. So we're able to, which we are implementing now, was we're able to give landlord sign-on bonuses. We have established a pot of funds for tenant damages, because that was also a big deal with landlords. You know, when a tenant moves out, sometimes they don't have the funding to rehab those units because they're in such bad condition. And so
Mm-hmm.
now we have the ability to help them with the getting the units back online, and also give them an incentive if that unit if they allow that unit to stay in the Section 8 program. That's the only way we can get these landlords to really understand how serious this is, and that we really want our families in decent, safe, and sanitary housing.
I'm glad that you circled back to the earlier comment you had talked about with landlords. And now, it told us of what you're doing with the bonuses for, new property owners or to retain these landlords. What's the feedback that you're getting within that community?
So, interestingly enough, we just had our MTW community meeting. So, we have to have the public hearing on any one of the changes that we're making. And one of the comments that we received at the hearing was that how happy they were that HABC is adopting these new changes for landlords. So I thought that was really good, and it really showed that we're on the right track.
You mentioned after having such a rough go round during COVID and what happened, as far as eviction moratoriums or, just seeing a complete disruption really to the market. Various programs within affordable housing rely so much on landlord participation. I'm sure this is a welcomed policy shift or change to really have them part of seeing what options are there for rents and, sign-on bonuses or whatever you want to call them? But if you were going to predict how much more is needed to recruit landlords for your area, what would you summarize that to look like? Is it more of the same flexibility with rents, or is it more sign-on bonuses, or is there something else that your landlords need to be able to come in confidently within your programs?
What we implemented this time around was as a result of having those meetings with landlords and understanding what they need. So until we are able to assess how successful this is, I won't be able to say what else do they need. I do know that there are some streamlining that we need to do to our program because, as you know, there's still that level of bureaucracy that exists where you still have to collect so much data. And we just went virtual. So we have a landlord portal that the landlords are happy now. They can get all their results on this portal. They don't have to go into the office. They can, upload information. So we're really looking now, once we implemented these incentives, to see what else do we need to tweak, because we have been tweaking the program since I arrived here in Baltimore.
I just did a random search here that says the average rents for Baltimore City, and they're really all over the place depending on what the neighborhood is. But it's everything from $1,000 up to $2,800. That's a big swing for landlords to navigate in the market and to be able to afford what they've got to do for property improvements and try to meet the needs of the program. So I'm sure that you guys are navigating these market swings closely. And is there a landlord group that you guys work with, a real estate group? How do you guys stay connected to landlords?
So we have, of course, the meetings with the landlords where we, talk with them about different programs. We also use for our most vulnerable clientele. We have home finders that works with that group, case managers, and their job is to make sure that they keep a close eye, which we do, keep a very close eye on the changes, the market changes in the city, and the rents are going up. And for example, the areas with the 2,800 for a one bedroom, you have those areas. Those are areas of opportunity, and so those are the areas that we are really banging on doors with landlords to say, let us in, because it's very
Mm-hmm.
difficult for them to let us in simply because they're used to the market rate. And also here in Baltimore, we just adopted, well, in Maryland, the income discrimination against the type of income. But, landlords still find a way. We're still working with that particular market. We have a few families in areas of opportunities, and we were able to negotiate the rent. But some of these rents are so high that we can't pay them. Even with our higher percentage of fair market, we still are priced out of those communities.
I'm not sure when the funders make the allocation of what you guys are eligible for. I'm not sure if they realize all of the different doors you have to knock on, all the partnerships you have to make, in addition to all the compliance pieces. And oh, by the way, making sure all the redevelopment is in a location with the amenities. The funding just doesn't seem to be able to cover all of these unique dynamics, which in the beginning, I feel like affordable housing was just property management. Paint the unit, mow the grass, do the basic for property management. But with what you've described, it's a whole nother affordable housing continuum that has to occur, which the funding just isn't there to try to do all the things. And so speak to how you guys are so effective with what you're doing. I mean, is it your partners? Is it your staff? Is it D, all of the above?
It is all of the above. And I have to say, you have to have good relationships with the state, with the city, and your staff have to be able to know what doors to knock on. So here in Baltimore, of course, we have our 9% tax credit allocation that has really helped because everyone realized when you get the 9%, Years ago, you didn't have a gap with the 9%, but now with the issues that we're having with the supply chain, and we're having issues with labor and what have you, we've seen an increase, a 35 to 40% increase in construction costs. And so that has created some of the gaps that we're facing, but we're still working through with the city. We're working through our funding, making sure, see if we can pull down some of our reserves, and also working with the state. And that's why we have been able to close down Somerset phase one, two, and three. Those are currently, phase one is completely occupied, and phase two and three, they're under. And those are all, some of them are twinning deals, 9%, 4%. So we were one of the first in the state of Maryland to do a twinning deal where we took the 9% tax credits and the four and put them together. That was another way, being creative of how you close these deals, working with these private funders, working with some of the foundations to close some of these gaps. So it takes so much to really bring together everyone to get the deals closed. And the staff, that's their job. They work with the developers, they make sure that we're all on track. So it's all of the above. Everybody must come. It's a village. Honestly, it's a village in order for us to make these deals work. And we've been successful because we have really worked hard to make sure the message is clear. We get the message out, being extremely transparent to say, at the end of the day, this is what can happen here in this area. And this is how much investment Baltimore can get if we are able to really close on these deals.
Speaking of new funding awards, tell us about Enterprise Community Partners recently awarding you funding for wellness programs. What is that going to look like for your older adults? And tell us about that exciting news.
So we have a really great SVP of resident services. Her name is Tracy Kaiser Oliver. And Tracy, she runs a very well-oiled machine in the resident services area. So of course, they go after grant. They have their grant writers. They make sure that they're bringing in all the different services that our families need. And they have their pulse on the need of the families. And they do that from door knocking to surveys to all the different things that they have implemented, pop-ups, because they are always interfacing with our residents. So this grant will help us to provide the services that our seniors need. Seniors are a very vulnerable population. A lot of them are empty nesters, and they require more services than our regular folks that's trying to get to work and that kind of thing. So some of them may need a living aid, some of them may need, so it will help us to make the assessment and be able to provide the necessary services for those families. Some of these seniors have no families, and so we're their family. We're the ones that's there giving them presents at Christmas time, making sure that they have food for Thanksgiving. So it will allow us to do all those things that the families will never be able to take advantage of.
So, last question here, and you may have just answered it actually, but let me give you a chance to maybe add another one. What is the most enjoyable part of your job?
Wow. I love dealing with the families. I love my staff. Wow. They make me look good every single day. The things that they have to go through in some of these properties just to have a full day of work is amazing. They're my heroes with some of the things that I have seen. Let's be frank, some of them dodge bullets just to get back to their office. The fact that they come back the next day, and it's not, a lot of them, this is not a job for them. This is something that they enjoy doing, and they come in and they hit the ground running every day. So I enjoy that portion of it, where I am connecting with them and making sure we're communicating with them. I have a great communications department They're magnificent when it comes to reaching out and touching our families, including the residents. I enjoy my residents. There are times when I'll go to meeting and they'll yell and scream at me, and I understand. It's okay. We're going to make this better, because when I come back, I promise you, I always say that to them. I'll take it today, but when I come back, I promise you're going to be happy to see me. And it never fails. The thank yous that you get. I remember when I was in my social work class in college, I remember my professor said 1 out of the hundreds that you touch will say thank you. But you know what? Back in the day, that was true, but I'm seeing more now, seeing more from our staff and from our residents, the thank yous, because you're doing something good. And that's what I enjoy more than anything else, is that touch and making sure at the end of the day, I can see the smile on their faces when they walk into those new apartments and are able to look at a unit with their own washer and dryer, air conditioning, little things that we take for granted. And they're able to go in with granite countertops, stainless steel appliances, and just to see the look on their faces. It's amazing.
It sounds like you have a bunch of leaders who really understand their mission and are driven by those experiences. And that's the secret for how you guys are doing a great job in Baltimore.
Yes, definitely. And we have a great team. The team understands 4 C's, which is customer service, communication, collaboration, and community. They understand that. And that's what we want, right? As a housing authority, we want to be able to collaborate, not just with ourselves, but with the residents, with our stakeholders. We want to be able to have clear and concise communications. So to let people be transparent, let people know what we're doing. And of course, customer service. We have got to have great customer service if you intend to do well in this industry. And then, of course, collaboration. So it's awesome. Even though this is not what I wanted to do, I wanted to always be second in command, I can honestly say I'm enjoying this.
Well, destiny decided differently, so we are glad you're there. And I also know that many of our listeners are going to hear everything that you guys are doing, from redevelopment to customer engagement and going out and seeking additional funds, and that they're going to be inspired. So the ripple effect of your leadership is going to be even more magnified outside of the city of Baltimore. And, nationally, you're recently added to the Council of Large Public Housing Authority. So you've had a microphone for a long time, and your impact is going throughout many, many other areas other than just Baltimore. And we're better for it, because it's going to let lots of other people hear and see, and then be encouraged by that as well.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Well, Janet, it has been fantastic to have you on the podcast, and we will stay connected. And I thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to ChangeMakers with Katie Goar. To find out more about Katie, go to quadel.com. That's QUADEL.com. This has been a production of Forbes Books Radio.